Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and this is the only this is one of the places where the enemy has nothing to say. What am I talking about? It's the only place where the enemy has nothing to say except bail out, abandon ship, and take cover.
Oh, man, you left me speechless again there, Nick. And you know why? Because you got our names right this week. Last week, or an election
I was calling you Nick and me Joe.
I know. Yeah, I know. But you corrected it right away, so that was pretty good. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but we didn't edit that mistake out because it was too good.
Oh, yeah. Listen, we're not perfect, not by a long shot. And that's kind of what makes it fun. At some point, you're going to stick your foot in your mouth, which is far more often my case than it is Joseph's. And what do? You just laugh at yourself, right?
Oh, I don't know. I put my foot in my mouth quite a bit. And I try to be careful these days. But, in my younger years, I was far more intense and far more willing to, set the world on fire. And but not anymore. I'm just a lot more circumspect, a lot calmer. And I don't know if it makes good radio. That's the honest to goodness truth.
Every once in a while, the world needs a good cleansing. And setting the world on fire, just a surface fire, nothing serious. It's like burning off the dead grass in the springtime, right?
Right.
And we need that once in a while.
Well, we have a pretty packed lineup tonight. And, with Justin Trudeau and Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump and the G7. Oh, and I have a pet peeve about the G7. Let me just get this off my chest right from the start, okay? It's not that I have a problem with the G7. I have a real problem with, I was reading over the weekend, so many news stories with people referring to the G7 as an alliance. And I just want to point out to people, in case you don't know, and this is actually directed at those ignorant, dumb, stupid journalists out there who don't understand that, NATO is an alliance. The G7 is not an alliance. Coincidentally, a number of the G7 members are members of the NATO alliance. But, throw Russia in there. If Russia gets back in and it's the G8, it is not the G8 alliance, okay? So can we please stop referring to the G7 as alliance? It is a collection of related industrialized nations that are, the world's leading economies. That's all it is. Everything else is purely coincidental. So I just had to get that off my chest. And for all of you responsible, not for all of you responsible, for the responsible, knowledgeable journalists that's out there.
The very few of them that there are.
I have one or two. I apologize if you think that I've lumped you in with all those others that are just too lazy to actually check into it a little bit and know what they're writing about. There was actually a great online talking about people not knowing what they're talking about. And I know, Nick, we're going to talk about Facebook and social media and all that later on. So, yeah. And I generally stay away from social media. I have a Facebook page. I friend people who want to be friends with me. Most of the time, I'm not partial or prejudiced against anyone trying to friend me. Although, you young ladies out there that are trying to engage me in sex acts, I generally block you when you're sending me those messages. I'm not really, interested, and frankly, you're probably not interested in me. But setting that aside for a second, I have been following Facebook a little bit more lately, and there was this one great post that somebody had put up about whose wedding was it now? It wasn't. Oh, I know what it was. The Trimming of the Color, which is the Queen's official, not her real birthday, but her official state birthday,
right,
is celebrated every year in early June. And all of the regiments that participate in the Royal Guard, they do a ceremonial parade where the Queen reviews them, etc. And it's called Trooping the Color, and it happens every single year. So this year, when they played "God Save the Queen,"
right?
Okay, I mean that's
their national anthem.
There's no surprises there. So anyway, somebody posts on Facebook how cool they think it is that the Queen chose to play the same wedding music that was played at Harry and what's her name's wedding ceremony a few weeks ago.
You're kidding.
No. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, are people really out there that ignorant? I mean, seriously, man.
Of course they're going to play God Save the Queen. The Queen is in attendance. She's the reigning sovereign. You would, of course, play the wedding.
You're giving by explaining it, you're giving it too much credibility. I'm just saying that it's amazing how foolish, how unknowledgeable, how ignorant people can be, and that may not be the majority. That may be just a small minority, but they have this soapbox, and
But the thing is, if you stop and it doesn't even take. Look, you don't have to know anything about protocol. You don't have to know anything about the royal family or the Queen herself to understand that, something, if I just think about this for a minute, why would they play God Save the Queen at an official function the Queen is attending? And actually let that sit and stew, even overnight, you would probably come up with the right answer.
Right.
Or a lot better than the one put forward.
Our Country 'Tis of Thee, which is the God Save the Queen American version.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Or when they play Hail the Chief, when the president enters a joint gathering of the Senate and the House. Okay, they play Hail the Chief. It's a stupid song. I think it's absolutely brainless, but that's their tradition.
Okay, our number to call, ladies and gentlemen, is area code 844, because it's toll-free. So it's 844-415-2115. The number again, toll-free, anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115. Pick up the phone, join in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. And Nick, how could we possibly do this show without talking again about Donald Trump? But in this case, Donald Trump, I mean, we'll probably get into a little bit about Kim Jong-un and the Singapore summit, but yeah. I think the first thing I want to talk about is Donald Trump and frankly the spat between the Donald and
the used
Justin,
sock salesman, yeah.
The used sock salesman, and we didn't prepare any audio for this, but just to set it up. So, as everybody knows, or presumably, I guess I shouldn't be guessing that. Donald was up here. President Trump was up in Quebec City, in Canada, attending this year's G7 conference. And by all accounts, he really didn't want to attend. He attended because, well, it's the thing to do. But it was really hard up against and conflicting with his preparations for the summit in Singapore with the leader of North Korea.
Right.
So by all accounts, he didn't really want to come. And he figured it's a waste of time. And, he's been pushing protectionist policy very hard in the United States. And I have a few things to say about that in a minute or two. And anyway, they agreed on a fluffy communique that referred to things like climate change and the Paris Accord, et cetera, et cetera. The content of it wasn't important. What's really important is to understand that agreeing to this communique probably was one of those things that President Trump had to grit his teeth on, because I don't think he agreed with most of the items that were in the communique. But for the sake of being a team player and diplomatic, et cetera, he agreed.
Right.
So he leaves Canada. He's on Air Force One, and as he's leaving, as soon as he flies out, Prime Minister Trudeau calls a press conference, or probably there was one scheduled already, and starts to talk in disparaging terms, not over the top.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't outrageous.
No, I have to give him credit, or I have to not give him discredit where it's not due. It's probably the best way to say it. So he refers to the sanctions on steel and aluminum that the Americans have imposed on Canada as, insulting. It's a little insulting. Maybe not the best choice of words to use, but no, I don't think it's over the top, really. Anyway, why don't you take it from here? Okay,
well, the bottom line here is that, first of all, Trudeau...
Okay, no, but let's talk about President Trump's reaction.
All right, well, this is actually where I'm going.
Okay.
Because Trump's on Air Force One. And as Trump pointed out, maybe Justin didn't know, there's like 20 TVs on Air Force One, and it's the most connected airplane in the world. There's nothing that goes on in the world that you can't find out about on Air Force One. So, of course, he's watching TV to see the reaction after he leaves early. They have this press conference. And Trump goes, what? What is this? Now, Trump is Trump. And there's a great post. There's a great story out of the National Post by our friend John Robson, who says, look, you can't tame Trump, but we can stop provoking him. And he gives a long list of reasons. But Trump's reaction, we shouldn't be surprised at, because this is the way he negotiates. He's doing what he's always done. A bunch of bluster, look, he's not as much as a lot of people. There's millions of people around the world, including here in Canada, who take great pleasure in loathing the man, everything he stands for. But he's not stupid. You don't become the president of the world's most powerful country if you're stupid, unless you're Democrat. I'm kidding. I'm teasing. But the point is, even Obama wasn't a stupid man. He just wasn't a very good president. So the point is, this is the way that Trump has always negotiated if you look back through his history. Why are we surprised at this? We should have just gone, okay, if that's the way he wants to be, then fine. And let him go off and do his thing in Singapore. But no, we have to poke the bear, because this is exactly the kind of thing he reacts to. Say, we're not going to be pushed around. And in Trump's mind, he didn't push them around. All he did do was say, look, you guys, and he does have a point, okay, because he called Canada weak. And what was the other phrase he used?
Well, he called Trudeau weak.
Okay, Trudeau weak.
He called Trudeau weak.
And when you're calling the prime minister in an official setting like that weak, you're actually calling everything he represents weak.
Right.
So by extension, he's calling Canada weak.
Right.
And now there's a lot of arguments to be made where that's actually true. Who is it that really defends, and no disrespect to our military, but who is it we rely on to defend our airspace? The Americans. Who is it that we expect to defend us from, threats from all corners of the world? The Americans. We have been, like the Europeans, coasting along, spending a fraction of what the Americans do on defense, and they've been basically defending the free world since the end of World War II. Now, all of a sudden, he's saying, hey, wait a minute. Why are we doing this? They've asked for us to increase our defense spending from 1.5 to 2 points GDP or something along that line, and the other European nations to help picking up the slack. So there's a lot when he says that, people take it in a very narrow frame of reference. Okay, they don't look at the broader picture. I'm not defending Trump. I'm just trying to explain how he thinks, at least as I understand it. Right. This is a negotiating tactic.
Yeah, and this is the way. I mean, he's made a lot of money over the years. This is just his personality.
Precisely.
He's not smart. He's not stupid because of it. He's definitely bombastic. He's definitely, I guess you could say he was a bit of a blowhard, but this is how he deals with things. And people aren't used to it. And as a consequence of that, they think, oh, he's a buffoon, he's stupid, he's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's doing. It's not that he doesn't know what he's doing. It's that he knows what he's doing in the context of how he does these things.
Right.
And whether they work or they don't work, well, and we can get into that in a few minutes. But this is his style. Love it or leave it. This is the way he does things.
And this is why, at least as I understand it, and I'm no international affairs expert, I'm just me. But when I see him say stuff, I've got a great relationship with Canada. We left on friendly terms. We shook hands. On one hand, it seems like he's slapping the prime minister in the face, and the next hand he says, we're the best buddies. Because for him, there's a separation between business and personal. And when he's negotiating NAFTA or this G7, and the other reason he didn't want to come, by the way, is because he's surrounded by 6 other world leaders who all expect him to pick up the tab as they have always done. And he said, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So, they're all mad at him because now they got to start paying their own freight. So, I don't blame him for not wanting to come and sitting in a room that's really hostile towards him the moment he walks through the door.
Okay, but he came, and I have to tell you this, okay? I've defended Donald Trump, as you know. I'm not his biggest fan, but I understand.
I'm in the same category.
I'm sorry?
I'm in the same category.
Okay, so I've defended him, and in this case, I don't think he was that bad, but I have to tell you that some of the officials, Peter Navarro,
that went over the top.
Was that was over the top.
Yes, and he did apologize for that later.
You know, there's a special place in hell for
leaders.
Okay, he didn't use Justin Trudeau's name,
but everybody knew
everybody
who he was
talking about Justin. Well, of course he was, and okay, that is over the top, and it's hard for me to see how you get your way when you're doing this. And I have to tell you that politically, I actually think this helps Justin Trudeau. I think that most Liberal supporters, most Trudeau supporters out there are not big fans of Donald Trump, and I think it helps Justin politically, domestically, if he's seen to be standing up to Trump. Now, having said that, I think it's really important to understand that, I think that it was a mistake, and it continues to be a mistake for Justin to poke the bear, if I could use that term.
The eagle, actually, but yeah.
A little. I mean, I think that, this is the way that the president of the United States is. You recognize it. You let it roll off, whatever's going on, water off a duck's back.
Right.
And you just focus on the issues and not get into a war of words. And in defense of Prime Minister Trudeau, I think that, they shied away from it a little bit. They didn't overreact in response. But still, I think you have to be a little more cautious. I don't think that it's bad to think of Donald Trump as being that blowhard, that bombastic guy, and to say, we're not going to engage on that level. We're not going to attack him. We're not going to insult him. We're not going to provoke him. Let's just focus on the facts. And the facts, and this is, I think, some important things to bear in mind. The fact about the United States is that they really are not free traders. They talk a big free trade game, but the Americans have been very protectionist on a lot of files for a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
They always have been from day one.
Yep.
So it's a mistake to assume that the Americans are really going to engage in free trade. And I have to be honest, it's a mistake to assume that Canadians are going to engage in real free trade. And yes, free trade has to be regulated trade, but we aren't as free as perhaps we ought to be. So nobody's hands are perfectly clean here when it comes to the spat over trade. I think that the idea of slapping tariffs on the steel products from Canada that the Americans have done, I think that's a mistake. I think it's short-sighted. I think it's uninformed. But I'm not upset or surprised that the American administration is standing up for American workers, and any more than I would be upset or surprised if Canadian politicians, Justin Trudeau and his cabinet and his negotiators, when they're at the table, they're not giving away the farm either. So everybody has to take a step back. Everybody has to take a deep breath, relax, and just understand that this is a process of negotiation. And at the end of the day, I think that when we're talking about NAFTA, a new NAFTA agreement, well, I think that we'll probably have a new NAFTA agreement. And in the end, it'll be good or not so good, but it'll be workable.
Well, I think that from everybody, especially when Trump says something, because people have been so focused on every word the man says for so long, ever since the election, even before the election, during the run-up to the election, the nomination process where he became the Republican candidate, the actual election race itself against Hillary, they've been hanging on every single word the guy says. They've lost sight of the forest because of the Donald tree, and they focus on him. I think, though, if you look with a broader perspective, further down the road, in 3 months, in 6 months, this will all be forgotten. They will have resolved this because it's in the best interest of both countries. We both have what the other one needs. Okay, we have raw materials. We have some manufacturing, nothing compared to the Americans have, but they have massive manufacturing capability and some raw materials, and those things flow back and forth across the border all the time. However, the one thing that this does do is this spat. is it underlines the need, absolute need, for us to begin to start working towards energy independence, to get the Kinder Morgan pipeline done, to revitalize Energy East, because one of the great sticks that we don't really have to swing in this, if it does come to a trade war, is the idea that we import 750,000 barrels of fuel a day from the United States. Okay, I was listening to terrestrial radio today, and the commentators were talking about how nobody's mentioning that. And I think the reason they're not mentioning it is because if we cut that off, how do we replace it? We don't have a refining capacity to suddenly bump it up 750,000 barrels.
Right. I don't know what the numbers are, but I do know that we do have a shortage of refining capacity here. We have a lot of fuel. Interestingly enough, one area that we are world leaders in is not just coal, but clean coal. We have in Alberta alone, we don't just have hundreds of years supply of clean coal. We have thousands of years of supply of clean coal. And it's a market that is, I think, waiting to be exploited. Remember, when we talk about coal, we're not talking about the stuff that was being burned 100 years ago or 200 years ago or even 40 or 50 years ago. So the product is better, the technology is better, and it's not unusual. If you go to Alberta, it's actually not unusual today to find guys out heating in the agricultural industry, heating their barns, heating their greenhouses, and even heating their homes with coal-fired boilers. Because you can buy in Alberta now and have delivered even with the carbon taxes and cap and trade and all of the regulatory issues around it, you can have a ton of coal delivered to your home for less than $100, and you can heat your home in Alberta probably with a ton of coal for the whole winter, maybe a little bit more. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that if you're using coal, that you can actually heat your home for the entire winter for somewhere in the order of $100, maybe a little north of $100. So I know it's a little off topic, but we have the ability to be energy efficient, but we do lack some refining capacity, and we do lack the ability to get our product to the refineries that we do have. So that's an issue. But here's the problem, I think, Nick. This is why I don't agree. I mean, it's like talking about, we're gonna develop nuclear weapons because we're in a trade war with the United States. And I go, really, guys? Everybody just take your breath, catch your breath, okay? There's no trade war here. Our two economies, when I was telling somebody about this the other day, we don't really have an American economy and a Canadian economy. We have a North American economy.
And that's fair. I think that's a reasonable assumption.
Right. So when we talk about the North American Free Trade Agreement, that's not just a fancy name. It's a reality. So each of the three partners in North America, particularly Canada and the United States, they have, large aspects of their own economy, but the integration between the two economies is so great that it's really not realistic to think in terms of trade war. So we have these little spats now and then, disagreements between friends. The Americans, under President Trump especially, the Americans generally are going to negotiate tough, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're elected to look after American interests. Our negotiators are going to be tough negotiators as well, I would expect. You just expect it's just different dealing with Donald Trump. His style is different than George W. Bush's style was. Yep. Different than
name the president. He's unique.
Any of the presidents. Okay, and the same thing on our side as well. So, and by the way, I remember when they were negotiating the original free trade agreement, when Brian Mulroney was the prime minister, and Canada's chief negotiator was Simon Reisman, and at that time, I don't know if you recall, but the shoe was literally on the other foot. I mean, the Americans were complaining all the time about Simon Reisman, and he was tough, and he was angry, and he was blusterer, and Mr. Reisman, as the chief negotiator at that time, had no problems going to the press and talking tough and speaking in somewhat insulting terms as well. So that's just the nature of the beast. Mm-hmm. On the question of energy, I have to say this as well, okay? That would be almost like the nuclear option, but the reality is, we could talk until the cows come home about how we want to use it as a stick in negotiations. But guys, we're years. If we wanted to become energy efficient in that we have the capacity not just to extract our resources, but to refine those resources to get them efficiently to the market across Canada without involving the Americans, that may be a possibility, but that's a possibility that's not going to happen this year or next year or the year after. That's a long-term thing, and it's an expensive thing.
I agree with you, but you got to start somewhere. And if you're ever going to become energy efficient, what better time to start the process? Because you're right. I'm not arguing with anything you just said as far as the timeline is concerned, or even its impact on any short-term negotiations, like within the time frame of what it takes to start becoming energy efficient and actually end up there. You're talking decades. So any trade negotiation, you're never going to make it, that stick is never going to come available to you in time to be useful in the short term. But you have to start at some place. At some point, you have to say, okay, we need to start planting trees under which we will not sit. And we have to start thinking about the country as a whole and stop thinking about political. Now, I understand as those words come out of my mouth that finding a party, any party, who wants to think more than 5 years out is nigh on impossible in this country.
You're talking about a political party.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's all kinds of people who want to think 15, 20, 30 years out. I'm one of them, but I'm not in office.
Well, someone far wiser than you and I put together, Nick, once observed that a politician thinks of the next election and a statesman thinks of the next generation. And what we need are statesmen, and we need statesmen not just in Canada, but we need statesmen in the United States. We need statesmen everywhere. And there just seems to be
lack of them.
Yeah, there's a real dearth of good statesmen around the world today. And we'll get into this after the break. I think talk a little bit about the Singapore summit and Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And there's Pierre. I was going to say Pierre Trudeau, but Justin Trudeau, Donald Trump, and Kim Jong-un. And there's actually a reason why I'm putting them all three together. We'll talk about that after the break as well. But the real issue for me is, there's a real dearth of statesmanship. I think of a certain at the political level, at least, at a certain degree of. I'm going to use the term professionalism. I don't mean that in the economic sense. I mean that in the competency sense. There's a lot of short-sightedness. And I just don't know how you overcome that. It's the downside of democracy. It's easy for us to point fingers and blame the politicians, but the people elect the politicians, and largely people elect politicians based on what politicians promise them, and it's the voters themselves who don't take a long-term view. They want their instant gratification on whatever the subject is, and if they don't get it, then they vote whoever it is out of office, or they vote for somebody else who is promising. And often, unfortunately, politicians actually deliver on some of these promises, and then you get the problems that you get with public finance. Look at what's happening in Ontario, and we've really been swinging a stick on this show about what's been going on in Ontario since we started the show. But what's going on in Ontario is not just in Ontario. It may be a basket case financially, and it may be one of the worst cases right now in the West, in the Western world, and that's the absolute truth. Again, I don't think that Ontarians really truly appreciate how bad things are. But you go to the States, and an economy in the United States that's pretty much the same as Ontario in terms of size and population is the state of California, and in California things are incredibly bad financially as well. So, and they're going to get worse if we stop sending. Ironically, if Doug Ford follows through on his promise to end cap and trade, which for those of you who are listening, the practical implication of that of cap and trade is that we've been sending billions of dollars every year to the state of California. So it's a little complicated how that happens, but that's the practical implication of it. So anyway, Nick, it's the bottom of the hour. Let's take a short break, and we'll get into some of that other stuff when we get back.
All right, we'll be right back. You stick around. We'll be back with more.
Okay, welcome to the second segment of the Combat Zone. You're live with Joseph, that's me, and he's Nick. And our number to call if you want to join in the conversation, toll free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115. You know, getting back, I know we didn't want to get into back into the trade stuff in this segment, Nick, but would he, Donald Trump, have gotten the North Koreans to the negotiating table without his blowhardness and bombacity and all of that stuff? I don't know. And, you know...
Are you being serious?
Yeah, I'm serious. I'm 100% serious. The other thing I have to point out is when Trump was talking about pulling out of the Iran so-called nuclear deal, and people were going, oh, the deal's going to collapse, etc. In the last 2 or 3 weeks before Trump pulled the Americans out of that deal, there were serious negotiations going on, including the Iranians. And there was a very real attempt to renegotiate the terms in order to preserve the deal, the agreement, in a fashion that would be acceptable to the Americans. That would never have happened if Donald Trump had not been the president and he had not been, I hesitate to use the term rattling his saber, but okay, let's say beating his drum. And after the Americans did pull out, there have been ongoing discussions again. Whether the Americans decide to get back in, if the terms are right, I think it's anybody's best guess. But I think that the chances of them getting back in or signing a new agreement that addresses the issues that they feel need to be addressed are as good as them not. But the point I'm making is that whatever you think of Donald Trump and his style of conducting negotiations, you can't argue that it works.
Anyway, it's really hard to judge the success of this one-day summit because on the surface, it seems like there was a lot. On the surface now, it seems like there was a lot given up by the Americans for not much from the North Koreans. However, the North Koreans have destroyed an engine test site that is critical to their ICBM program. The Americans have halted a war games in the Sea of Japan with Japan and South Korea, which is meant to reassure them that, yes, we're still here, and that should North Korea get stupid, we're on your side and we'll be here. Okay, that's the reason for those annual events. But as you and I were talking about off air, when you look at the broader picture, what do the Americans really lose other than saving pocket change on running? And when you compare how much it costs to run that exercise to the defense budget, it's pocket change. He's not saving that much money. It was a silly excuse to come up with. But in the greater scheme of things, did the Americans actually lose anything? No. Did they actually at least put forward the idea that there's a chance to demilitarize that peninsula? Yes. Will it happen? Maybe. But it wasn't going to happen without Trump.
I don't know. Maybe it would have, although other presidents have tried.
Did they get this far?
Good question. I don't know that they've gotten quite this far, but certainly they've gotten it in the context of starting from ground zero, pardon the pun. They got some concessions out of the North Koreans. But the problem with the agreements that they had was that the North Koreans didn't keep to those agreements.
That's what I mean. They're not trustworthy.
And are they going to keep to this agreement? I don't know.
Well, that's
I think
the
if past experience is anything as a teacher, then I think it's fair to say that they probably won't, or they're going to probably try to find ways to wiggle out of it. But this is an ongoing process. The North Koreans have agreed to do certain things, and in return, the Americans have agreed to do or to not do certain things. That's the nature of negotiation. There's quid pro quo, and it's pointless arguing about whether you gave too much up or not enough up or whatever. The truth is, I don't really know that the Americans have given anything up substantially that they can't immediately get back, if you will, in terms of sanctions or prestige or credibility. So, and yes, it's true. I've heard people say that, Kim Jong-un has gained a tremendous amount of respectability that perhaps he didn't deserve, being the tin pot dictator that he perhaps is. I don't subscribe to that. I think that if they're moving forward and it's helpful for world peace to allow Kim Jong-un to have the illusion that he wrestled, wheat shipments or grain shipments out of the West in order to improve the lives of largely a starving population, then speaking personally, I would be prepared to do that. I'm a little, somewhat more than mildly surprised that people on the left who like to talk about caring for people are so quick to say, oh, well, we don't really care about the people in North Korea. Everybody should just take a pill, relax. Let's just see what's going on. And who knows? Maybe in the end, Donald Trump gets that Nobel Peace Prize and deserves it.
Well, here's the only comment I'll add to that, because it's I'm in a position where I'm not going to argue with too many of your points. I'm reminded of what Winston Churchill said: "Jaw is always better than war." So as long as they're talking and they're not shooting, it's a step forward. But as far as the left is concerned, showing compassion for the poor, they only do that when it suits them. What the left really does is hates the rich and will use anyone and anything to put that forward. They simply don't like anybody who has $1 more than they do. And if you can use an organization or a group to be able to forward their agenda of beggaring the rich, they'll do it. So on one hand, they look like they're trying to help the poor, but when it really matters, and women's groups are the same thing. When women were being stoned to death in Afghanistan for not wearing a burqa or going out with without male accompaniment, where were the women's groups? Not a word out of them. Same thing in Iran when women were being stoned for adultery because they got raped in prison. Where were the women's groups? Nowhere to be seen. And this isn't true of just women's groups. This is the left, generally speaking, only rises to the defense of the defenseless when it suits them, not out of any great altruistic motivation.
I think you're right. I only hear people talking on the left about caring for people when they can use it as a stick to demonstrate how people on the right aren't caring for people.
Right.
The senators, Nick. Oh, my goodness gracious.
The story, and I'm sure that everybody, unless you're living under a rock, and it doesn't matter where you live, this is international.
By the way, I must be living under a rock because I was just in Winnipeg for a couple of days, and just as I said that, no disrespect to you guys out in Winnipeg, okay? That I wasn't under a rock because I was in Winnipeg. But I got back in Ottawa late last night, and my wife picked me up, and she started talking about this stuff, and I have to tell you, I had not heard about it.
Well, for the two people on the planet, Joseph and the other guy, who haven't heard about this story, Erik Karlsson's wife was being cyberbullied by somebody who was making the most disgusting, egregious remarks, even blaming Erik Karlsson's girlfriend, whose name escapes me at the moment, for the stillbirth of their son. Okay, that's how low this got. Now, she thinks it was, what the heck is his name? Mike Hoffman's girlfriend. And they tried to get a peace bond against her.
By the way, just for those of you who are listening, Mike Hoffman and Erik Karlsson are teammates.
They play on the Senators.
On the Ottawa Senators NHL hockey team.
Right.
And they're not just teammates, they are stars.
All right. So that's as far as I want to go as far as hockey is concerned. But what I can never understand, let's take this into the realm of cyberbullying. We've seen it in the mainstream media many times where kids commit suicide or try to harm themselves or have emotional problems because of what goes on online. Now,
allegedly.
Well, in a lot of cases it does.
Well, I don't know. It's that simple, but we'll get into that. You go ahead,
okay,
Nick. I'll let you finish.
Let me say this, and then we're probably going to have to take a break, and we'll dive back in. To me, the answer is simple. I thought we were closer to the top of the hour than that. The answer to me is simple. Let's pretend that all of a sudden, let's say that it was you or me or one of our kids were being cyberbullied, okay, online, Facebook, Twitter, who knows, all the different platforms that are out there. If you didn't have Facebook, would your life end tomorrow? If you didn't have Snapchat or Twitter, would your life end tomorrow? Now, if you said, okay, let's just walk away from that stuff, we'll shut that stuff down. You want to play games on the computer, fine. You want to use it for homework or research, fine, go ahead. But stay away from Facebook, stay away from Twitter, stay away from Snapchat, and all other foolishness. Just stay away from it. If it's causing you that much grief, stay away from it. To me, that seems to be the easiest answer. Now, kids will say, yeah, but when I go to school, they're going to tease me because I'm not on. You know what? Kids have been teased since we had school about one thing or another. I know a little red-haired girl that had her ponytails dipped in ink.
You did not dip those ponytails in ink, did you?
No, but I watched it happen during the play.
Oh, dear.
I'm talking about Anne of Green Gables and Gilbert Sullivan dipping.
Okay, I was worried for a moment there, Nick, that you had...
It was a Canadian analogy that I was trying to work in.
I understand. Okay, that's fine. I'll let you off the comment.
Thank you. But I have seen kids bullied. I was bullied in school. I think in some sense, most of us, if not all of us, have. You know, it's that doesn't change. That's always been the case. So you had several choices. If that's the case, if your kid is coming home after being bullied and it's just, in tears, first of all, emotionally support them. And secondly, you have to think about if it gets really bad, if the school won't respond and deal with it, then you can either homeschool, you can send them to private school, you can change schools. In other words, you have options. Now, some people are going to say, well, I don't have the money for those things. Then you need to teach your children to have thicker skins. Make them tough psychologically. Say, look, you're going to have to go through this. You're going to have to shoulder this and not let it get to you. Now, that's easy to say, but it's also the truth because we used to go through it, but long before there was Facebook, but long before there was Twitter or Snapchat or any of that nonsense.
Yeah, I agree with you. When our kids were growing up, of course, social media was not as big as it is today, but it was there, and there was email, and I just tell people, hit the delete button.
Exactly.
Hit the delete button, and if you can't take Facebook, just get off Facebook. Who cares?
Well, that's the point I'm making.
So I'm not really sure what the obsession is over it, but I agree with you about the toughening people up. Listen, we have to go for a break, Nick, so let's pick this up again when we get back.
We'll do that. We'll be right back with more after this. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's the Combat Zone. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and we've spent the first hour talking a lot about international affairs. Then we shifted over towards talking about this whole thing about cyberbullying. The story about the Ottawa Senators is international news, where you have a couple of stories. The one we're concerned with is between Eric Carlson and Mike Hoffman, actually their prospective wife and girlfriend. And the cyberbullying has been going on in those cases. It's all of its allegations. None of it's been proved in court. And we were talking about on a larger picture when cyberbullying enters into your life and in this modern world of ours, unless you are actually a hermit living in a cave, wearing bear skins and no internet connection, it's going to enter your life at some point.
Yeah, you're right, and hence, my advice to my kids, and I still talk to them about it when this topic comes up, and they have children now who are starting to get into the preteen years and are starting to pay attention to this kind of stuff. And look, I don't understand why everybody's got to be on Facebook and social media. I think that people are too obsessed with it. I don't know that parents. I know there were lots of things that were kind of faddish that my parents said, no, you're not doing that. And we kind of felt left out about it a little bit. But, being a little left out is actually maybe not such a bad thing. I think that parents today probably obsess maybe a little bit too much about their kids feeling included in every single thing and not feeling challenged and not feeling, that some people don't like them. Human beings like people and human beings dislike people, and that's just part of the human nature, and it's part of the human experience, and people have to live with it. But I'm not defending cyberbullying. I'm not defending any kind of bullying.
Of course not.
I'm just saying it's not the end of the world, and people have to learn to deal with it
when it happens.
Deal with it effectively. And when it comes to cyberbullying in particular, you don't have to have a complicated strategy and pull in all of the teachers and all of the social workers and all of the technical people. All you have to do is flick the switch, turn the switch off. And if you're on email, you use your little index finger on the delete button. End of story.
This is a little bit of an aside, but it talks about how to deal with people who are being, I won't call, in this particular case, the guy wasn't being bullied, he was just being a jerk. My 16-year-old daughter, or who will be 16 this summer, I should say, was on the. She and her other two siblings who are still at home are now in school. Although we homeschooled them for most of their lives, just because our lives changed, we weren't able to do it anymore. So we put them into the public school system. And she was on the bus one day going to school, and this kid was being a typical noxious 16-year-old boy. You got to know my daughter. She doesn't take this kind of stuff very well. She has a bit of a temper. So Gabby's a rather strong young lady physically. She can be intimidating if you're only 15, and she kind of stares down at you with those. She's farm strong, put it that way. She's not afraid of hard work and is very good at it. So she's a little stronger than the average 15-year-old boy. This kid finally got under her skin, and she jumped up out of her seat, walked over, stared at him an inch, nose to nose, an inch apart, and said, "If you don't shut up, I will skin you with my teeth." And that was the end of that.
Yeah, but today, how long ago did that happen?
Scalp you with my teeth.
How long ago did that happen?
Last year.
Yeah, see, she's lucky she didn't get suspended from school for talking violently.
No, there's nobody on that bus. There was nobody on that bus going to turn her in, because he was not just being a jerk to her. He was a jerk to everybody.
Okay, so listen, Nick, I want to, first of all, point out that the first thing is people can join in the conversation live by calling toll-free.
Yeah, we got to give the number.
844-415-2115. But I also wanted to tell people, for those of you who are listening live online right now, if you look at the player, you'll see that in the player there is a little bubble. You know, the kind of bubble that you have around cartoon characters when you're talking? And if you click on that, you'll be able to join in some live chat. So even though we're not doing so much live chat on Facebook, because we're not doing Facebook Live, although people can be listening through the link on Facebook to the show. And I think that people are making some comments along the way on Facebook. And I'm saying that because I see Nick diligently typing away, responding to people. So I'm a little nervous about what he's saying. But I just wanted to remind people and help them to point out to them that if you want to participate in anything that we're talking about, you don't want to call in, but you maybe want to leave some comments in chat. There is a live chat function in the player. So as I said, if you look at the little symbols, the symbol that appears to be like a cartoon bubble, click on that and you'll go to the live chat section. And you can leave a comment, and I'm looking at it right now, and gosh, somebody from thinkradio.ca left a message saying, "Is anybody out there?" I wonder who that was. Okay. Anyway.
Well, we'll try and get him some people to respond to.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Now, just before we move over to Doug Ford, I want to mention, because that's what I'm actually doing on Facebook right now. I'm having a bit of a conversation with a guy called Tommy about an economic series I posted. It's an actual audio book, and it's by Henry Hazlitt, who wrote during the late 40s, early 50s, I believe, about
great economist.
Probably one of the best I've ever heard.
Right, and there are a lot of people that talk about Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and some of the material that they've produced, the von Mises Institute, all very good material. But in my view, the stuff that Henry Hazlitt wrote is probably the best. It's solid economics from A to Z or A to Z, and it's written in terms that are easy to understand, well presented, concrete. I highly recommend it. But you go ahead, Nick, and you finish your what
Okay,
you said.
well, I have the audiobook version link from YouTube posted on my Facebook page. Now, the audiobook is a little over 6 hours long. Now, nobody expects you, certainly least of all me, to sit for 6 hours and listen to a guy. It's not read by Henry. He's since passed away. It's read by some guy called Jeff Regenbach, who is an excellent narrator, by the way. From considering the content, because most people find economics really dull, which is why a lot of people don't bother studying it, which is a huge mistake. He does a good job, and they break it up into chapters, each one being roughly a half an hour long. So I'm a little over an hour, maybe an hour and a half into this. And if you try to listen to too much, you'll lose too much. So take it in 15, 20, 30-minute bites. Listen to it, digest it, understand it. Heck, I suggest you take notes. You know what? I might even go back and start this over again and actually sit down and take notes. Now, the reason for taking notes is because within an hour, if you hear something, you've forgotten 90% of it. But if you write it down, you retain 10 times more than you would by just listening. So even if you never look at the notes again, just take little point notes about the things that he's saying, and you'll retain a lot more, so that when you get into a conversation anywhere, be it on Facebook, at a coffee shop, you'll be able to draw from this information and help people understand better why some of the policies that we now see governments putting out aren't necessarily the best in the long run and actually have some pretty long-term, really negative connotations.
Right. Yeah. Henry Hazlitt, I think, is a master at explaining public finance.
Oh, is he ever good?
And explaining why the Keynesian model of public finance doesn't work. And, even Maynard Keynes himself understood that many aspects of his financial system, his economic system, didn't work. And his response to that was, when people said to him, it doesn't work in the long run, his response was, well, that may be, but in the long run, we're all dead. And, that may be the case, but in the long run, hopefully our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren are not dead. And we want to leave to them an economic system that is workable for them, and that they're not, always having to pay the price for our indulgences as baby boomers. And
we're seeing that now. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there's an old saying I really like. You should get into the habit of planting trees under which you will never sit. And I think if Henry were here, he would agree with that, because that's basically the model that he talks about, is look down the road at the long-term consequences. And he gives some great examples. So I'm not going to go on any longer about that. I think there's other important things we've got to get to. But I really encourage you, read. Yeah, actually, there's a PDF out there you could download and just go through it if you wanted to. You can listen to it on YouTube, of course, or follow the link that I posted. But take the time to absorb that information. It's probably the best 6 hours on an economics front that you'll ever spend. The education there is just top-notch. And I know I'm learning a ton from it, that's for sure. And that comes from a guy who didn't think he had anything left to learn. That's a joke, folks. I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, they didn't study that many economics down in the boiler room there, Nick.
No, but you
could have, actually. It's the truth is you could have. You had a lot of time to do it.
If you wanted to yell in the other guy's ear for 4 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we studied a lot of other things that were mathematically, what's the word I'm looking for? Mathematically, I won't say similar, but based. But they were things like thermodynamics, chemistry, physics, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, you know what? You're unfortunately, you're speaking with somebody who knows what really goes on down there in the bowels of the ship. Okay?
I didn't say it took place in the ship.
I know what you guys really were calculating, and that was, how much you could, how much beer you could get.
One of these days,
shore leave, and
I'll tell you about the best meal I ever had, and it wasn't in the galley, and it wasn't ashore. I'll tell you that story someday, because that was priceless.
Okay, so let's get it. I want to talk a little bit about Doug Ford.
Sure, absolutely.
Doug Ford, of course, dominated everything that we talked about last week. We had a pre-election show on Wednesday night, and then we had an actual election broadcast, and we had guest Russ Kuykendall brought a lot to the discussion. And so anyway, Doug now is the new premier or premier designate. They're in the process of transition. And he has reiterated, in case anybody is thinking that he's not going to follow through on his promises, that no, they should think twice, because he's planning on following through on everything that he promised during the campaign. So what do you think of that? Do you trust him?
Well, we don't have any record yet as a premier to go by. He's not even officially the premier. He's still the premier-elect. He doesn't take over till June 29th. But he's sending out all the right signals. Like when they asked him if he was going to attend the gay pride parade, he said, yeah, sure, as soon as you invite uniformed cops back, I'll be there, knowing they won't do that. So he's given them something that they could do. He put the ball squarely in their court, knowing that they're not going to hit it back. So there's that. The second thing is he has reiterated again this thing about cap and trade. It's a disastrous policy, and somebody on Facebook said, let's stop funding California, which you alluded to earlier. And I thought, yeah, that's absolutely right. So the signals that he's determined to get his mandate put into place, because let's face it, if we stop sending those billions to California every year, it goes a long way to starting to fill in the hole and to helping him get to a balanced budget.
Now, not really. I'm going to stop you there, okay, because it's a flow-through thing, okay? So the money that we collect in cap and trade actually does end up going to California. So, and that's actually a good thing to remember, because what it means is that when Doug says, I'm going to cut the carbon tax and the cap and trade stuff out of our fuel, and I'm going to our gasoline price is going to go down by X number of cents a liter.
10 cents.
And everybody was saying, well, how are you going to make up that hole in the budget? Actually, it's flow through. There is no hole in the budget. The money that's being collected at the pump is going to California. Now, I know people are going out there going, well, how is that possible, Joseph? Well, here it is, and I'm not going to get into a detailed explanation, and it's unfortunate that we had all of this cap and trade and all that stuff after Henry Hazlitt was around, because I'm sure he would be able to explain it a lot simpler and a lot better than certainly than I can, Nick. But the bottom line is this, okay? For all of those of you who are big fans of cap and trade, all that happens is if you are producing greenhouse gas, and by the way, I want to make clear, I don't care if you produce greenhouse gas. It's not pollution. As far as I'm concerned, produce as much carbon dioxide as you want. But for those who feel that that's a problem, well, the producers of this, rather than reducing their production, they buy credits from those who are not producing, and the money just trades back and forth. But in the end, there's actually no real reduction in the production of any of these so-called harmful gases.
Well, it's a
scam.
It's a shell game, absolutely.
Shell game, start to finish.
Well, when I said, and the moment I said that, that can help fill the hole, as soon as I said it, no, wait a minute, because no money collected. If he scraps the cap and trade and scraps the carbon tax on fuel, then there's no money coming in to fill the hole, no matter where we send it. So that was a flaw in my thinking, but that shows you how easy it is to fall into that trap. But to get back to whether or not Doug Ford's actually going to do this, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt until he proves me wrong.
Well, I don't want to make it sound like I'm drawing an equivalency between Doug Ford and Kim Jong-un in North Korea, but the reality is trust but verify.
Right, exactly.
So, yes, Doug Ford promised certain things, and we expect that he's going to follow through on them. And so, you can't just sit back now and give yourself a pat on the back as a conservative voter and say, okay, our job is done. That's not the way democracy works.
No.
Your job as a voter, as a citizen, is never done. And if you want to make sure that Doug Ford follows through on his promises, then stay engaged. If you were active in the election campaign, if you did any of that stuff, stay involved. And if you're concerned that he's not following through or he's getting a little wobbly, then, pick up the phone and call your local MPP, call the Premier's office when he's properly installed, and better yet, write a handwritten letter, not a form letter that you're sending by email, an actual handwritten letter that is going to go in the mail, that somebody's going to have to pick up and tear open and read, okay? And so you have to pay for a stamp, okay? Well, it's democracy. That's the price you pay. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, if that's the only price you pay, then you're doing okay. Because we spend $1 on a lot more foolish things than that.
Right.
If you can spend $1 on a lottery ticket, you can spend $1 on sending a letter to the Premier.
Right.
Okay, that's so. I guess it's just a wait and see, but I feel pretty confident that, especially on something like this. Imagine if he came out, let's say July 1st or the first week of July, had a press conference, say, we looked at this cap and trade thing, and I just don't see any benefit to canceling it after all. What would that do to his popularity amongst his constituency? I mean, it just would be devastating.
Right. Well, but that's the problem with a majority government, and I would not advocate not having a majority government. But the reality is, in our system, is once you have a majority government, you can do pretty much anything you want to do for 4 years. So you have to figure out ways to keep the pressure on.
Well, he'd get a flood of letters if he ever tried that.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think he would.
Yeah, but I certainly hope so.
I don't know.
I know he'd get at least one.
Well, he'd get more than a letter from me. He'd get a couple of phone calls, and some of the people around him would get a phone call or two probably. And
that's right.
And not just from me, but that's... Anyway, look, congratulations to Doug Ford. Congratulations to the team. Well, I was critical of them. As I said, I wouldn't unsay any of the criticism, but I think that there were missteps along the way. I think that they could have done a better job in many areas in terms of running a campaign, and I still have some concerns. But look, they won, and now they're in government, and they deserve to be in government.
Well, let me ask you this: since they're coming into government, what's her name? I can't even remember her name now. Kathleen Wynne shows you how quickly I'm trying to forget her. Was handed 7 seats, almost like a punishment by the people of Ontario, which puts them below official party status. Now, yeah, exactly. Best news I've heard in months. She wants Doug Ford to lower the bar to 7 to give her the official party status she needs to regain access to all that money for research and run a leader's office and all that sort of thing that they lost when they fell below the standard. Now, on top of that, she's also trying, I don't know how successful she is. I haven't seen anything in the press about it in the last few days. She's trying apparently to come up with a coalition between the Green Party leader, because there's only just the one of them, and the Liberals to give them the 8 seats they need for official party status. Now, I know what I would do if they pulled that stunt. I would raise it to 9, and just to make sure they don't get it. When you get trounced that badly by the voters of a province, then they don't want to hear from you. They have said, you've had 15 years, we're done talking to you. And for Doug Ford to give them this now would be a repudiation of the millions of people who voted against her. Because I'm not talking about those who voted for Ford, because a lot of people have voted for Andrea Horwath too, but clearly voted against the Liberals as a punishment for the way they ran that government for 15 years. So to reward her at this point, her and her 6 other colleagues, I think is a slap in the face.
Yeah, I've heard this. I've been reading a little bit about it online and listening to some of the comments in different online and terrestrial radio shows. I'm not too exercised over it. There's no hard and fast rule. The current rule in the legislature in Ontario is that you don't have official party status unless, as you say, you have 8 seats.
Right.
But that could change, and it's really up to members of the legislature to change that rule. And you're right that having official party status gives you certain privileges. One of the privileges, you do get some funding in addition to what your individual MPPs are already getting to fund their constituency and Queen's Park offices. So there is some funding available, and you get extra funding for the leader's office to do research, etc.
Right. Those
are not, whether you agree with them or not, it's really honestly not a lot of money, and I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that this is a hill to die on. What bothers me more than all of that, Nick, is not the money that you potentially could get if you have official party status in the legislature. And by the way, one of the other benefits is that you actually get into the question period rotation. So most of the time, if you're not an official party, your critics, quote unquote, don't get regular questions in question period, for whatever that's worth. Okay, I'm just saying that. But what I'm really troubled by is the subsidy that all political parties get, irrespective of the number of seats they get now in Ontario, based on the number of votes that they got, the percentage of the popular vote. And that doesn't matter. The Liberals qualify for that. The Green Party qualifies for it. And other political parties, any political party that achieved 2% of the popular vote across the province, or if they did that, then the party gets a quarterly subsidy from taxpayers. And for riding associations, again, it doesn't matter how the party performed across the province. For those riding associations where the candidate of the party received 5% in that particular riding, then that riding association gets a subsidy as well. And if you had the 2% across the province and 5% in individual riding associations, then the party gets both of them. In other words, the party generally gets a subsidy based on the number of votes they got if they achieve the 2%, and the riding associations that achieve 5% get their subsidy as well. It's an awful policy. It's one that was very unpopular federally, that the Conservatives under Stephen Harper repealed. And it's also a reflection of the reality that the people who are making policy with respect to election financing and political financing recognize that the limits that they've put in place are not the amount of money that you can raise based on the strict limits and the rules and regulations is not sufficient to be able to conduct proper political operations. And so rather than telling the truth about that and raising the donations or being a little more flexible in the rules, they pretend that they're very strict, and then they turn around and they force taxpayers without their consent to write checks. And nobody talked about this during the election campaign, but it's a very serious problem, and I would like to see it changed absolutely 100%.
All right, with that, we have to take a break. It's the bottom of the hour, so we'll do that. We'll take our break, and you guys stick around. We'll be right back with more on the Combat Zone.
Okay, welcome to the final half hour of the Combat Zone for Wednesday, June 13th today, I guess it is, right? 13th? I think it's the 13th.
13th?
Well, you'd think we'd know this kind of stuff. Anyway, we're into the home stretch here, and just want to remind you that if you're catching this on the live site, that if you look at the player, you'll see there's a bubble in that player that's similar to like the bubble that you would get on a cartoon. If you click on that, it'll take you to the page where you can chat live, and keep sending your feedback, guys. We appreciate it. Two other things: if you want to join the call, the In the Combat Zone live by phone, toll free, 844-415-2115. That's 844-415-2115. And one last thing, as a matter of housekeeping, Nick, I just want to encourage our listeners to reach out to their friends, whether they're on Facebook or by email or whatever social media they like to use, or talk about it, and get them to listen in next time around, or download or listen to some of the podcasts on the website. Our goal is to build this into Canada's flagship conservative talk show. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. So share the podcast with people and encourage them to participate. We won't bite. And, even if you're a rabid lunatic lefty, we'll give you the opportunity to present your case, before we cut you off and then make fun of you.
Actually, there is one more thing they could do if they wanted to, if the listeners are so inclined. They can send their gold bullion to Nick Vandergrat, Somewhereville, Ontario, 1234 Spruce and Juice, area code, anything you want to put in there, and just send it to that address, and I'll put it to good use.
Okay, that's not a real address, though, Nick. That's no good. Why you should be giving. Listen, we'll come up with a.
That's because nobody's going to send us their gold bullion.
No, but we'll come up with an address that nobody can trace.
Okay,
it'll be a real address.
Okay,
and
P.O. Box Office.
That's post office box.
That's it.
Whatever it is, and send us your gold.
That's right. We can always make use of gold.
Yes, yeah.
Even if you hammer it into something else.
And I'll tell you the truth. We are public-minded individuals, so we might even decide to set aside a portion of that gold to make voluntary contributions to retiring Canada's debt.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say to Out of Work Radio, not out of work, but...
And listen, I want to say to all you lunatic lefties out there who insist that, the rich aren't paying their fair share, we hear it all the time. And how many times, Nick, do you hear people say, well, I would be willing to pay more taxes for better health care? Well, you can. All you do is get in touch with the Ontario Treasury, and you can make voluntary contributions to help offset the added cost of, Viagra treatment or something like that, which I think you can. I don't know if you can get that, but can you get that in the free drug plan?
I have no idea.
I don't even know, but
after 8 kids, I'm not sure.
Thank goodness that we don't have to deal with the NDP magic drug plan.
Oh, you know something? I do want to say there is a government program I want to be put in place, and that is a government program that takes all of the Fisherman Friends throat lozenge packages, which I use, I won't say every day, but especially on a Wednesday. And what they need to do is to mandate that the manufacturer of these wonderful little lozenges put a stamp on every package that says, this is the top after you open it, stupid, so that when I go to open it, I don't pour them all over my lap because I'm holding the wrong end. So I think that's a very wise use of government money, and I would even advise them on that for a modest fee.
Yeah, and there are people listening into this show that are going to take you seriously, Nick. So, I'm going to have to start putting some disclaimers up. Okay.
I'm hoping it's the finance minister who's taking me seriously.
Nick's comments do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the other host of this show.
Well, there's somebody sent me this. I posted it on Facebook, and it's got a lot of reactions, so I thought I'd share it. It's called Politics Explained, and it's an analogous story about how our political system works. I told my son, you will marry the girl I choose. He said, no. I told him she is Bill Gates' daughter. He said, okay. I called Bill Gates and said, I want your daughter to marry my son. Gates said, no. I told Mr. Gates, my son is the CEO of the World Bank. He said, okay. I called the president of the World Bank and asked him to make my son the CEO. He said, nope. I told him my son is Bill Gates' son-in-law. He said, okay. And that's exactly how politics works. In a nutshell, that really kind of sums it. See, you don't have to watch clips of Yes Minister to understand the world of politics.
Oh, Nick, I have been collecting good clips from Yes Minister.
Oh my God, there's tons of them.
We're gonna start playing some of those clips because they I don't know if people are familiar with the show. Well, when we play some clips, we'll get into it. But just people, okay. Google Yes Minister.
Just go to YouTube.
Go to YouTube. You'll find lots of little clips, and I just want to say that having worked in politics for as long as I have, both inside and outside of government, let me just say that those of us in the know regard Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, which was the follow-up series, not as a political satire or spoof, but as ironclad, accurate documentary material.
My favorite one so far is about a 4 or 5 minute clip about shutting down a hospital that has no patients but 500 staff. And the only patient was the hospital administrator who tripped over some construction stuff and broke his leg. Other than that, there's nobody there, and the resistance he runs into trying to close it.
Okay, so we were talking. What are we talking about? We were talking about Doug Ford. Are we finished talking about Doug Ford?
I think we've milked Doug Ford's cow to the bone to empty.
Yeah. We'll have to see who's in the cabinet and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But speaking about cabinets or shadow cabinets, I don't think we can let the evening go, Nick, this week without talking a little bit about whatever's going on at the federal conservative scene in the party and the shadow cabinet and caucus, etc. And just a little background to this. Back in, everybody knows that Maxime Bernier was the runner-up in the 2017 leadership election. And Andrew Scheer became the leader by a razor-thin number. So Max Bernier writes a book about his policy ideas, his political ideas, etc., and he included in the book, I take it, I haven't read the book. I haven't read the manuscript, I should say, because the book's not published. It's not being published. And that's part of the story. So, but he did write a chapter or a section of a chapter talking about the leadership race. And in that chapter, he refers to Andrew Scheer's team as having signed up a number of people who he refers to as fake conservatives. In other words, people who were had no loyalty to the Conservative Party. They had no loyalty to the principles and policies of the Conservative Party. They just wanted to block Maxime from becoming the leader because Maxime wanted to put on the table dairy subsidies and other supply-side management items. And these people, the dairy farmers, were opposed to this, in Quebec in particular. They signed up a number of people, the Scheer people signed up a number of these people in order to get the votes because Andrew said that he was not going to do anything about this. So that's sort of the background. Somehow or other, I don't know how it happened, the press got a hold. I understood that the publisher might have leaked some of this information.
Well, he posted it on his own Facebook, on his own website. But not in
April. Originally in April when this came out, I don't know how it got out, but it got out, and the press reported on it. And my understanding is that in caucus there was a bit of a brouhaha over it, and Max agreed that he wouldn't publish the book. I'm a team player, I guess, he's a team player. I won't publish the book, etc. So that was in April. Here we are in June, and on the weekend, I guess, he took the chapter that had been previously leaked and posted it online. And so the Globe and Mail did a feature story on this, on Monday, I believe it was, again, bringing up the whole thing about fake conservatives. And the next thing we know, late yesterday, I guess Maxime Bernier was removed from the Conservative shadow cabinet. No clear explanation given as to why that was. Was it because of the comments about the fake conservatives? Was it about the fact that he promised allegedly not to publish the book, and now he's published a chapter of it online. And I saw his response to the criticisms in that area, and his response was, but the chapter was already leaked, so it's not like nobody knew about it, so I'm not doing anything that was not already in the public realm.
Yeah, I didn't break my agreement. It was already out there.
Right, and I'm not publishing the book. Was it because he broke his word? I don't know. I don't know what the problem was. If I was advising Maxime Bernier, I probably would have said to him, yeah, probably not. I don't know what the upside is to putting that online right now.
Yep.
So I probably would have said to him, yeah, don't do it. I just don't see what the benefit is.
All right, well, let's talk about what was the benefit to Andrew Scheer for booting Maxime Bernier from
that to me is the real question in all of this is, does this rise to the level that justifies Maxime Bernier being removed from the shadow cabinet? I mean, we're talking about a senior minister of the Crown in the previous governments,
right?
A potential future leadership candidate, if it ever came down to it, a past leadership candidate that, with the exception of, not with the exception of anything, but just came so close to winning. And so now I'm looking at the landscape and I'm going, Maxime Bernier out of shadow cabinet anyway.
Yeah, he didn't kick him out of the party. He just out of shadow cabinet.
Brad Trost, who came in fourth place, out through the nomination process. That I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say was interfered with. Okay, and then another prominent leadership candidate, Kelly Leitch, out. Now she quit, but there were reasons why I think she quit. I don't want to get into them right now.
Right.
This is not the way you build a team. And we go back to some of the discussion that we've had, Nick, about the Conservative Party and some of the things that were going on during the election campaign provincially.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep on saying to people, you keep on invoking this concept of team and teamwork, but in the final analysis, teamwork and loyalty, these are reciprocal relationships. And so if you really believe in teamwork, then you don't kick people off the team because they were critical of you. And I'm not even sure how much Maxime Bernier was critical here. Anyway, I'm astonished. I don't really know what they're trying to accomplish.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there's any element in this that comes from the idea that conservatives are so afraid of making a mistake that they, in fact, go around making them in spite of themselves? They're afraid of what the media is going to say. They're afraid they'll lose their opportunity to form government. Whatever it is, there's always in the background this culture of fear in the conservative circles about, oh, my God, we can't say that because. But as you've pointed out on more than one show, unless you start a conversation, you never get a chance to have it. So, and on the other side of the coin, what are they afraid of?
Well, I don't know. I don't see this as being a manifestation of the desire not to make mistakes. I just don't see where the mistake is embedded in all of this thing.
Well, that's because, when I say that, because when you look at conservative politicians across the board, especially in North America, and I'm broadening it out here a little bit on purpose, they're terrified of a lot of them are very afraid of whatever press they get because they know it's going to be bad or at least neutral, if certainly not almost never flattering, unless you support Pierre Trudeau or Justin Trudeau in his stand against Donald Trump. Then, of course, the media is nothing but praise for all the conservatives who stood with him. When you look across the board, these guys are all terrified of saying the wrong thing and having to apologize for it later because they know what the cost is. It could be up to and including losing their seat or their parliamentary privileges beyond being an MP or an MPP.
Right. I think that factors in quite often. I just don't think it factors in this case. And look, I guess what I would say to this is the Conservative Party, that everybody talks about the Big Tent Conservative Party, that the Conservative Party has to be a big tent. Well, is that just empty rhetoric, or is it true? Because if the Conservative Party is supposed to be a big tent, then surely to goodness there's room for true conservatives in the Conservative Party. Surely to goodness there's room for social conservatives to be in the Conservative Party.
And yet,
small government libertarian conservatives like Maxime Bernier to be active in the Conservative Party and to have the absolute unfettered right to sit down and to talk openly about issues, etc. And you can't say, in my judgment, you cannot say that what Max posted on his website in this chapter is breaking ranks with the party on policy. I don't buy it.
Well, the other thing I want to mention is that if you're going to boot people for things like that, now granted it's the shadow cabinet. We're not talking, he didn't boot him out of the party. But when you look at the effect, most people don't know what when you're talking about just the average Joe walking on the street, what do they know about shadow cabinets? All they know is Maxime Bernier has been disciplined by Andrew Scheer, and they don't know why. So when you look at this, what makes the Conservatives different than the Liberals who do the same thing?
And by the way, because it's shadow cabinet, you don't have the same degree of cabinet solidarity, the principle of cabinet solidarity that you have in a real government cabinet. Right. So, yeah, you want to all be pulling the wagon, in the same direction, but surely to goodness there has to be room for some debate or discussion. And this is a very serious concern of mine personally, and I hope this is not a harbinger of things to come.
I hope that you're right as well, because the last thing the Conservatives need, with only a year to go to the next election, is to appear disunified and in disarray. Whether that's true in the background or behind the curtain, that I won't say it doesn't matter, because it makes it harder to run an effective campaign if you're not all on the same page. But from a public consumption point of view, you have to adopt the duck mentality. Calm and cool and collected on the surface, but paddling like hell underneath. And for some reason, Conservatives seem to have a problem. Like, look at the other side of the aisle. They always link arms and band together. Look at when Justin Trudeau defended Morneau. Morneau should have got tossed months ago for the way that he's handling the country's finances. And yet, love him or hate him, and I tend towards the latter more than the former, Justin Trudeau stands up and defends his finance minister come hell or high water. Now, if the Conservatives would take a page out of that book and start defending each other so they don't get picked off one by the mainstream media or by, calls during election campaign for people to get booted off the party or whatever it is, it'd be a lot easier to present arguments that are counter and give people something solid to look at that's different than what's on the other side of the aisle.
Well, absolutely. But you're speaking tactically, you're speaking strategically, you're speaking in technical terms. And all of that, I think, is important. I think that you're spot on in every aspect of that, Nick. But I come back to some fundamental principles. And that is that, ultimately, if there's any reason to elect a Conservative Party to form the government, the party has to represent something more substantial than the mere fact that they're not the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
You have to have these policy debates. And I stress again that whatever has offended the party leadership with respect to Maxime Bernier isn't really, in this case, policy-oriented, because he's not going out there and saying our party's policy on supply management is wrong. Certainly he's not doing it in that kind of explicit, stark way.
Right.
But even if he was, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's a debate that we have to have internally. And now I'm looking at, what's going on in the trade debate between the United States and Canada. And lo and behold, the President Trump is actually referring to dairy subsidies and controls and barriers. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. But we have to be able to have these discussions. And I will say this, okay? All the time I'm hearing about what we can't talk about. Conservatives can't talk about this subject. They can't talk about that subject. Social policy, not to keep on flogging that horse, but conservatives are always being told you can't talk about abortion, you can't talk about marriage, you can't talk about welfare, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that, and I'm saying, well, the liberals talk about it all the time. We're not talking about it. It's the liberals that talk about it all the time.
You just don't want us to engage them.
And it's very frustrating. And part of what we want to do is we want to stimulate on this show. We want to stimulate these kinds of debates.
And that exactly is part of the reason, because there are people who are standing up and talking about this kind of stuff. And one of my favorites is Jordan Peterson, who is, if he's not a millionaire by now, will very soon be one, based on his doing exactly that. Having these kind of conversations, having the debates, knowing his stuff. Because, look, if you're going to start a conversation, then you pick the topic, I don't care which one it is. Space exploration, for all I care. Okay, which is we could do a whole show just on that. But because everybody says the world's resources are finite. Well, maybe they are, but the universes aren't. Anyway, I'll save that for some other time. But the bottom line is that unless you can engage when your enemy brings up a topic, then what are you doing on the battlefield? Why not just stay home?
Well, there are good, solid reasons why that are not theologically based, why we should support traditional marriage. There are solid policy reasons why we should.
There was.
Why are we not talking about marijuana legalization, which we didn't talk about tonight, and
we should have.
We should have, and we're going to get into that next week because there's a lot of shenanigans going on Parliament Hill about that right now. I got to tell you, but so we want to oppose legalization of marijuana. Oh, you can't talk about that because why? There are solid public policy reasons. It's not everybody keeps saying, "Oh, you can't legislate morality." Well, first of all, that's a stupid statement to do that. We do that all the time.
That's right.
But set that aside for a minute, okay? We're not talking. If you're talking about religious, Christian conservatives, etc., that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about solid policy debates, Anyway,
well, those debates should come from all corners of conservatism.
Right.
It doesn't matter which one it is.
And we should be able to have those debates vigorously internally within the political structure that exists at the federal level.
That's what policy conventions are for.
They're supposed to be about that, but there's far too much control, and it's disappointing. It's troubling because ultimately I don't think it's healthy for the party, and I don't think it's healthy for the country. Okay,
let me just I want to tell you that story just to end on a lighter note about the best meal I ever had. It's 1984. I'm a young sailor on HMCS Saguenay. We're at sea. I'll give you the abridged version. We're at sea and have been there for a while. We just left foreign port, probably Chatham, England, and we're on our way home. Now, when a ship gets ready to go to sea, they store ship. They bring on everything the ship's going to need: food, supplies, ammunition, all of it. And they have a pipe clear lower decks of all master seamen below store ship. Well, down in the middle of the ship, there's this one long hallway called Burma Road, and it runs right past the forward and the hatches to the boiler room. Now, my trade was called a stoker, and stokers work in those spaces. So to make a long story short, as we're storing getting ready for sea, there was somehow a case of frozen steaks, a sack of potatoes, a watermelon, and what else do we have? A bag of sweet corn. Ended up magically down in the boiler room. So it's now midnight, a little after midnight, on a watch called the Mids, and we have taken some of that food stuffs we just happen to find down in the space.
So that magic food?
Oh, that magic food, absolutely. And, well, it just magically appeared. It must have been, I don't know, because it certainly wasn't us. We had nothing to do with it. It had nothing to do with the stokers on either side of the hatch dropping stuff down to the guy on the lower deck. Anyway, so everything down there is run by steam, and it's nice and hot. Great cooking services. So we had steaks done to a turn. We had baked potatoes, sweet corn cooked in their own skin and soaked in water and cooked in their own skin. And it was the meal to die for. So I remember this guy, he comes up a lot in my stories. His name was Larry Brody. And he had just finished handing out the last of the meals, and he had in his hand a plate for him. There's 5 guys down in the boiler room, and all of a sudden he feels a little tap on his shoulder. And he turns, and it's the executive officer. And the XO realizes what's going on, knows how long we've been gone, leans into Larry Brody, and he says, "Leading Seaman Brody, I hope that one's for me." And Brody said, "Sir, I made it with you in mind," and he handed it to him. So the XO shared a meal with us, and when he was done, he turned and handed the plate back to Brody, and he said, "That's the best meal I never had." He turned and walked out, and oh my God, it was good.
Okay, so send us your comments at thecombatzone.ca, comments at thecombatzone.ca. Nick, we'll join together and do this again next week.
I look forward to it. Thanks for listening, folks, and we'll catch you all again then.